But I always found it incredibly difficult to prepare for this day. And especially this year, I think more than other years, given just the strangeness of the times in which we are living, a pandemic that has so profoundly changed our world, changed our way of life. Everything is different, and we know that Amir Tashem, everything is going to be fine and everything is going to be great, but we don't yet know the path that it takes to get to the resolution of this crisis. So we live in a time of turmoil, and Tisha B'Av is a day of turmoil, and I just found myself incredibly unsettled. But perhaps because of all the things that are happening in the world around us, I began to ask myself a question that I never really asked before when preparing for Tisha B'Av, which is, what is the avoda of this day? What is it that we're supposed to accomplish? Because the truth is, in all of my previous Tisha B'Avs, the avoda of the day was pretty clear. The goal is to mourn. The goal is to cry. But perhaps in these times in which we're living, is there something more? Is there some other deeper, some additional dimension of our avoda that we are supposed to try to grapple with on this most difficult and mournful of days? But as I sat down to try to contemplate this question, every time I began to try to delve into the sources, I would lose myself in a sea of emotion and a profound sea of sadness. Because when you begin to really peel off the layers of Tisha B'Av, and there are so many layers. The layers begin in Eicha Rabbah, where the Medrash tells us the dramatic stories, the heartbreaking stories of Churban Bayis Rishon and Churban Bayis Sheni. And you go throughout our history, and with less than a century ago, you look at the Churban, Europe, the Holocaust. It's overwhelming. And I came across something that really captured the way that I feel. I quoted from this incredible woman last year. Her name is Cecilia Klein. Mrs. Klein is a survivor of the Holocaust. I believe she's still alive. And she wrote a couple of books about the Holocaust, about her memoirs of the Holocaust, and one of them was a dramatic book called Poems of the Holocaust. She's a very talented writer. She chose to give expression to her experiences through poetry. And at the end of the book, it's a very short book of poems. At the end of the book, she has something, and it's a letter to her mother. Her mother perished in Auschwitz. I'll tell you that story in just a little bit. But listen to this letter. She writes, "Dear mother, the letter I am writing to you will be placed in a museum." The letter that she wrote to her mother is in Yad Vashem. The letter I'm writing to you will be placed in a museum. I was under the impression that only fine art finds its way to museums. However, this is a special kind of museum. You and 6 million like you created this museum. My children and I are delivering this letter in person. Mother, I always remembered your wise words. When you cry alone. And if you smile, the world smiles with you. Another one of your wise sayings, time is the best healer. Mother, I smiled and smiled until my jaw hurt. I smiled when you were absent on my wedding day. I smiled when I gave birth to my children, and you never held them in your arms. I smiled when I was for years hospitalized and you could not comfort me. Later, when you missed all my happy occasions, our children's bar mitzvahs, graduations, weddings, I kept smiling. Mother dear, the world did not smile with me. I felt alone. Was it because inside me, nothing ever smiled? But you were right about the tears. The world did not cry with me. I did cry alone. My tears were reserved for you, for my sister Fegi, for her husband Avram, and their 3 children, Hershey, Dori, and Ethel, for my brother Chaim, his wife Shoshana, for your little grandson Danny, whom you removed from my sister Minna's arms, so that she may live, and for the 6 million. As for time, Mother dear, time did not work the magic of healing. In each phase of my life, my pain was emphasized, as with the realization of motherhood. For as a mother, I felt more keenly your suffering as you watched your children's suffocation. Mother, there is no balm for my wound. You were right. The world did not cry with me. I always cry alone. Please, Mother, implore God that our children's laughter should come from their hearts. Let your suffering and ours absolve all of the generations to come. And may they know the inner peace, which was never mine. With love, your daughter Tzivya, as you named me in Hebrew. And I was so struck by this letter, specifically the last line. And may they know the inner peace, which was never mine. And maybe that's what Tisha B'Av brings to light. You see, we go through life, and we go through the other days of the year, smiling and upbeat and optimistic and hopeful and joyful, for that is the hallmark of the Jew. But when you peel away the layers, I lack inner peace. And I lack inner peace because the pain is so profound. And the pain is so overwhelming. And the enormity of our losses over the generations are so difficult. And so for 364 days a year, we engage in a bit of cognitive dissonance. We simply put it out of our mind because we have to. Because how else do you build a nation? How else do you build a life? How else do you build a future if you're constantly anchored and wallowing in your pain? But for one day of the year, for one day, we peel back all of the layers. All of the layers. And when you peel back those layers, you find such primordial pain. You find such difficulty. You find such overwhelming gashes and scars and gaping holes. You know, sometimes we think that it's in the past. Baruch Hashem, we live in different times, and Baruch Hashem, we do live in different times. And we are so privileged that our generation need not see the heartbreak, the loss that previous generations have endured. But you know, Rabbi Soloveitchik points out something amazing. He says that we know that Ribono Shel Olam is past, present, and future. What the Rav calls the unitive time consciousness. There's no past, present, and future for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's all one entity of time. And he says the Jew who is created b'tselem Elokim also possesses this unitive time consciousness. And that's why even if you look at our Yomim Tovim, when we celebrate Pesach, what does the Gemara say? Chayiv Adam liros es atzmo ki'ilu hi yotza mimitzrayim. Person is obligated not to remember a historical event, but to see myself as if I'm leaving Egypt. And on Shavuos, when we stand up for Aseres HaDibros, why? To recreate Sinaitic revelation. And when we sit in our sukkahs, on sukkahs, it's not just to remember that which was in the desert, but it's to feel ourselves, b'tseila dehemenusa, to feel ourselves in the active embrace and active sheltering of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So you see, my friends, It's impossible to say that we're mourning over something which was. Because on some level, the Churban of the past unfolds in front of our eyes now. That the Holocaust happens now. And the Crusades happen now. And the pogroms, because that's how it is in the eyes of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He's Hayahoveh V'yeh. Time is unfolding all dimensions of time at once. And so as much as we try to compartmentalize things in the past, that works for 364 days of the year. But on Tisha B'Av, it all comes rushing out. On Tisha B'Av, past, present, and future all meld together. And suddenly the pain that I pushed to the recesses of my heart comes flowing out. I'll give you a simple example of this. If you look in the packets, if you turn to page 22 in your packet. If anyone doesn't have packets, there are more copies up front over here. We'll get to this beautiful piece by the Ish Kodesh, by the Piaget's, a little bit later. But if you take a look at that picture on the top left of a beautiful young boy, Hasidic Bacher, with his payas being held by that Nazi, Yimach Shemo B'Zichro. They would ask you, who do you see when you look at that picture? So when I look at that picture, I see a boy who's roughly the same age as my sons. And so I see my child in that picture. And so it's not someone else's loss. It's not something that happened 80 years ago. When I look at that picture, I feel that loss. And I feel that precious boy's pain. As if it was unfolding in front of my eyes now. And when I look at the picture to the right of that, then I see a mother holding the child. And the Nazis, Yimach Shemo B'Zichram, in their brutal sadism, tried to conserve bullets by shooting mother and children, knowing that the mothers were clutching the children close to them, knowing that one bullet could snuff out the life of 2 Jews. So what do you see when you see that picture? I see a woman who could have been my wife and a child that could have been my child. And I see that. And I'll be honest, I wonder to myself, I say, Ribono Shel Olam, I know that I see these pictures. But you don't see pictures. You actually see these events. And not only do you see these events once, a number of decades ago, but Ribono Shel Olam, you see these events each and every day. Because HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you are Haya Hoveh V'yeh. You see these events every day. I can't see these events every day. For if I would simply cease to function and be unable to build a present and a future. But you, Ribono Shel Olam, you see this every single day. So maybe you'll say, well, HaKadosh Baruch Hu knows what the plan is. He sees the pictures, he sees the images, he sees the people, but he knows that it's all part of a hashkach, of a divine providence. And of course, we believe that with all of our heart. That every circumstance, from the most tragic to the most beautiful, is part of the Ribono Shel Olam's master plan. But tell me, do you believe that HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't weep when he sees these images? Do you imagine that every single day when HaKadosh Baruch Hu sees that sweet young boy being treated in such a brutal fashion, that he doesn't shed divine tears over that? I feel like I know for sure that he does. Because I know how much I love my children. And I know that as much as I love my children, HaKadosh Baruch Hu loves us even more. So this is Tisha B'Av. Tisha B'Av is the day where I realize that I don't have inner peace. I like to think I have inner peace. For 364 days of the year I have inner peace. But then when I peel back the layers of who I am, of who we are as a people, I begin to realize that I really don't have inner peace. That I really am so broken because I'm so overwhelmed by the losses of my people. But the question becomes, what do we do with this? What do we do with this brokenness? Because although, as Mrs. Klein said so beautifully, may they know the inner peace which was never mine. We have to grow from this Tisha B'Av. And our avoda somehow is to come out of this day as different people. So how do we do that? How do we somehow marshal the pain and to be able to use it as some type of catalyst for personalistic growth? Because crying is a big part of the avodah of the day. We'll come back to that in just a little bit. But how do we grow? How do we become better? How do we push ourselves to self-actualize as a result of the Churbans of the past? So I want to share with you an amazing idea. I'll share a little bit, and then we're going to sing a little bit and say some Kinnos. Then we'll come back and revisit these ideas in just a bit. The Gemara says in number 1 in your sheets, in your packets, B'Tisha B'Av nigzar lavoseinu shelo yikansu la'aretz. We know the Mishnah Maseches Tainis, that Tisha B'Av did not begin as a day marked for tragedy. Tisha B'Av becomes a day of tragedy in the beginning because of the Chitam Meraglim, the sin of the spies. The spies who were supposed to come back and deliver such exciting, vibrant news about entry into Eretz Yisrael instead go ahead and deliver such negativity, such slanderous reports, and as a result, this day of Tisha B'Av, this day became marked for sadness. And the Medrash in Eicha Rabbah says something absolutely amazing. In number 2, Rabbi Yitzchak Pasach, Rabbi Yitzchak began by saying, he says, Tachas asher lo avarat Hashem Elokecha b'simcha b'tuv levav meirov kol va'avarat ha'esevecha. It says, Ilu zachisem, had you merited, hayisim korim batorah sivi emo v'sita emo bahar nachalascha va'achshav shelo zachisem hari atem korim tavo kora asam lefanecha. So the Medrash says something absolutely amazing. Had we merited, we would have read the pasuk Sivi Emo V'Sita Emo Bahar Nachalascha, which is the pasuk by Az Yashir that makes reference to the planting and the building of the Beis Hamikdash. Had you merited, had you rejected the sin of the spies, you would have, instead of reading, you would have read today about the planting of Klal Yisrael and Eretz Yisrael and the Beis Hamikdash. But now that you accepted the sin of the spies, Hari Atem Korim, Tavo Kora Asam Lefanecha. You read the pasuk, let all evil befall them. Ilu zachisem, had you merited, Hayisem Korim Batorah Shimu Amim Yirgazun. Had you merited, you would have read the pasuk, the nations will hear and they will fear you. Va'achshav shelo zachisem, but now that you did not merit, Hari Atem Korim Shimu Kina'anacha Ani. Here, for I am broken, for I sigh. Ilu zachisem hayisem korim batorah ra'ora isi as ani ami asher b'mitzrayim va'achshav shelo zachisem harietem korim ra'a Hashem kitzar li me'aychar mamaru. And the Medrash goes on and on and on. You look at the Medrash on your own, because it's a striking Medrash. And the style of the Medrash is Ilu zachisem. Had you done which was right, you would have been reading the psukim of joy and jubilation today. But because you did not do that which was right, you will read these mournful psukim. And the Medrash goes on and on and on. And I'll tell you the truth, it's one of the most heartbreaking midrashim that I've ever, you'll see this of really one of the most heartbreaking midrashim. Eicha Rabbah is filled with so many midrashim, with terrible and catastrophic and barbaric and heartbreaking stories. And this is the most heartbreaking medrash. And yes, this Ilu Zachisem, had you done that which was right on Tisha B'Av so many thousands of years ago, had you rejected the slander of the spies, had you gone into Eretz Yisrael, our narrative and our story would have been so different and so distinct. But because you didn't, you'll read Eicha. Because you didn't, you'll read these mournful, dirgeful psukim. And the Sfasemes Teger Rebbe, Rabbi Yehuda Aryeh Leib Altulit from 1847 to 1905 says something amazing. In number 3, he says, Ilu Zachinu Hayinu Margishim B'Yom Tes B'Av Es Or Hamoados Hagonus Bo. Listen to what the Sfas Emes says. Difference, do you know what this day was supposed to be? It was supposed to be a Yom Tif. It was supposed to be a day of celebration. What was supposed to happen was the Meraglim were supposed to come back and they were supposed to say, Eretz Yisrael is great. And we were supposed to say, let's go. And we were supposed to say, okay. And we would have gone. And Moshe Rabbeinu would have let us in, perhaps. And everything would have been different. Says the Sfas Emes, Ilu Zachinu, had we merited, Margishim B'Yom Tes B'Av Es Or Hamoados Hagonus Bo. Had we merited, we would have felt the light of the Yomim Tovim, the light of Yom Tov that is embedded in this day. V'ayinu sasim usmeichim bo ki b'shar hayomim tovim. And we would have celebrated on this day like the rest of the Yomim Tovim. V'achshav shelo zachinu kala oros stumos v'chavuyos. And the Sfas Emes says, now that we did not merit all of the light that was once part of this day is closed off and hidden. So friends, do you understand the enormity of the Sfas Emes' words? This day was supposed to be Kodesh Kadashim. This was supposed to be the day that we embraced our destiny. This was supposed to be the day that was the actualization of the Abrahamic promise of going into Eretz Yisrael, becoming an independent, autonomous nation, people with destiny. Ilu Zachinu. Had we merited, this day would have had a Kiddusha to rival the Kiddush of any other day. But now that we did not merit, now that we made our mistakes of the past, all the light is closed off. All the light of this day is hidden. And the Sfas Emes and the Medrash are trying to highlight a different dimension of Tisha B'Av. See, Tisha B'Av is not just about mourning for the catastrophic events which had befallen our people over the last 2,000 years. But there's an additional dimension of mourning in Tisha B'Av. The mourning of what could have been. What could have been? You know, sometimes something tragic happens. And okay, it's tragic. You deal with the tragedy and you move on. But sometimes tragedy is compounded because not only is there a tragic circumstance, but it could have been so much different. You hear this. Rahman al-Islam, when a person loses a child, the loss of a child is a twofold loss. I lost a beautiful extension of me. I lost a piece of me. But then I also mourn the loss of what that child could have been. So it doesn't matter what age that child leaves this world. If it's a young child, what their bar mitzvah would have been like, what their chasana would have been like, or even if they're a little older, what would they have become in this world? So it says this Sfas Emes. The tears of Tisha B'Av are not only for what we've lost, but the pain is amplified because of what could have been. Sometimes we think that Tisha B'Av is like two dimensions. It could have been a regular day, or ultimately, again, it could have been, or it was a terrible day. It's not true. The two dimensions of the dialectic was, it could have been a Kodesh Kadoshim. It could have been a day you find in the Svarim that would have rivaled the holiness of Yom Kippur. Or it could have been what we have today. The pain of this day is the recognition of what could have been. Rabbi Soloveitchik talks about this. I've mentioned this many times. By Yomim Noraim. The Rav calls it the pain of Ilu Yacholti. If only I could have. If only I could have. He describes this pain in the realm of personal loss. Right? The person loses a loved one, and any person who's ever lost someone who they love. It's the same thing. Ilu Yacholti, if only. If only I could have 5 more minutes. If only I could have one more embrace. If only I could say the things that I wanted so badly to say, but for whatever reason I never summoned up the courage to say when my loved one was here. Rabbi Soloveitchik writes about this in such a beautiful way. He says that every year when he would prepare his Shabbos Shuvah Drasha, he would run the ideas past his father, Ramosha Soloveitchik. And he discusses about the year that his father passed away. He says, Father, I have so many new ideas. Some of them I know that you would love. And some of them I know that you would reject vociferously. But if only I could argue with you now. The Rav goes on and he says, every year before he gave his tshuva drasha, the Rav's tshuva drasha was not an hour and a half on a Shabbos afternoon. The Rav's tshuva drasha was often given on Motzei Shabbos and went for a number of hours. And he says he would tell his wife about the ideas that he's going to bring as part of his tshuva drasha. And his wife, Rebbetzin Soloveitchik, would always tell him, maybe you should shorten this. Every good Rebbetzin knows when to tell her husband, maybe you should make this a little bit shorter. Maybe this idea you should build on a little bit. And Rebbe Soloveitchik writes, he says, this year I said over my tshuva drasha to you. And he says, I said it, ve'ein ma'aneh. But there was no one to answer. Rabbi Soloveitchik had passed away that year. And Rav said, perhaps you did answer, but your sweet voice got lost in the rustle of the trees. Ilu yacholti, ilu zachinu. It's a difference. Part of the pain of Tisha B'Av is what could have been. We all have pain like that. The pain of what could have been. We look back in our lives and we say to ourselves, had I made a different choice, all different areas of life, different choices in relationships, different choices in career, different choices in lifestyle, how different my life could have been. If you take a look at number 4, to begin an interesting raya to this dynamic from a totally different place. The Torah in Parshas Mitzorah discusses the purification process for the Mitzorah. Person contracts saras. We loosely translate it as leprosy, but it's not really leprosy. Saras is a physical manifestation of a spiritual ailment that a person gets for speaking Lashon Hara. So the Torah says that you have to go ahead and send away 2 birds. V'tziva hakoyin, number 4. V'tziva hakoyin v'lakach lamit teher shtei tziporim chayos tehoros ve'itz erev u'shnit alaziz. You have to take 2 birds, 2 kosher birds. That's part of the purification process. And Rashi HaKadosh says in number 5, why is it that you have to take birds? Rashi says, Lefi shanegoim boin aloshin hara shumase pitputei dvarim. Because why does a person get saras? Because they chirp too much, right? Saras comes from too much talking. Just like the birds chirp too much. So sometimes, again, the person who has saras, he chirped too much, talked too much. And therefore you bring birds as part of his tara process. But ask the Sfas Emes, why 2 birds? Why 2 birds? And remember, it's not just 2 birds. One of the birds is shachted, and one of the birds is set free. And look what the Sfas Emes says. Bepastik shtei tziporim chayos berashi lefisha and the goyim ban aloshin hara v'tziporim pitputei kol. D'isra b'zohar HaKadosh tazriya da negoin ba'in al mila bisha v'al milin tovin da'asi liyadei v'lo malil hechashisi mitov uke'evin ne'achar. Says the Sfas Emes quoting the Zohar something amazing. You know, when you speak lashon hara, there's really 2 things that are happening. You're saying something negative, you're saying something slanderous, but you're also losing out on a dramatic opportunity. For in those same moments when you were saying something terrible, you could have also been saying something positive. In those same moments when you were destroying another person with your words, you could have also been building someone else up with a compliment, with a kind word, with a gesture. And so therefore, says the Zohar, something absolutely amazing. 1 bird represents the negative speech, and 1 bird represents the positive speech. And the bird which represents the negative speech, that bird is shechted because you've done such damage. But the bird that represents the positive speech, that bird is let go and flies away. Because that bird represents the lost opportunity. You had an opportunity. I had an opportunity to use my koach hadibur, to use my power of speech, to build someone up, to make the world a little bit better. And instead I used it to deconstruct, to destroy. That opportunity that I had to make the world better, to make a person better, has escaped and flown away. Sometimes never to be regained. The power, the pain of Tisha B'Av is about Ilu Zachinu, Ilu Yacholti, lost opportunities. Lost opportunities. This day did not have to be like this. But we made wrong decisions. And as a result, we are here. Why is this important? Because, my friends, you understand that Tisha B'Av is not just about, I mentioned this last night, not just about the Beis HaMikdash, which stood in Yerushalayim. But Tisha B'Av is about our own Batei Mikdash as well. And part of what we mourn today is that over the years, I have destroyed my personal Beis HaMikdash as well. And I've destroyed it in a variety of ways. I've destroyed it sometimes because I didn't know better. I've destroyed it sometimes because I knew better, but I just didn't care enough. I've destroyed it with bad decisions. I've destroyed it with wrong turns. I've destroyed my Beis HaMikdash so many times. Sometimes when I look at my personal Beis HaMikdash, I also say, Ilu Zachinu, Ilu Yacholti. If only, I struggle with this very often, if only I would have made different decisions. If only I would have chosen differently some time back. If only I had turned right instead of turned left. If only I had done this instead of this. If only. Ilu Zachinu, Ilu Yacholti. How many birds of opportunity have I let slip through my hands over the years? And so today I cry for those birds. I cry for those birds that were in my grasp. I cry for those words. I cry for those actions. I could have made myself different. Life could have been different. The Beis HaMikdash could be here. The national Beis HaMikdash and my personal Beis HaMikdash, it all could have been here. But I made mistakes. I destroyed. I let it go. So today is about mourning for the mistakes that have been made. Today is about mourning for the destruction that has come about as a result of those mistakes. But the last part of our avodah is equally as important as the first two. How do I rebuild? How do I rebuild? Because I can't wallow in the birds that have been lost and cannot be retrieved. And I can't wallow in the mistakes that have been committed and cannot be undone. And I can't, as we've seen, take away the pain that has been sitting in my personal heart and sits in our collective heart over the millennia. But I can pledge to do better in the future. So our avodah that we are going to accomplish, Emir Hashem, together over the next little while, is to recognize how we got here. Ilu zachinu. It all came down to a choice that was made on this day thousands of years ago. To accept the slanderous report or to reject the slanderous report. We made the wrong decision. And as a result, have been suffering the consequences over the last 2,000 plus years. So today we mourn the consequences of bad decisions. Today we mourn all that has been lost for our people. Today we mourn the fact that for many of us, the personal mikdash, the Bilvavi Mishkan Evne, lies in ruin as well. But today, we will also learn and grow together and try to figure out how to rebuild the national Beis HaMikdash, how to rebuild the personal Beis HaMikdash, so that this will be the last Tisha B'Av that we will ever have to reflect on Ilu Zachinu. This will be the last Tisha B'Av that we'll have to read Tochacha and Eicha. The Emir Hashem will be able to tap into, as the Sfas Emes said, the beautiful, holy, and magnificent light of this day. We'll recite now Kinnos together. Do you have a tune for it?
Take your mic off.
You take it.
Bring it back. If you want to speak before for 2 minutes. Start saying it, I'll sing at the end. Shavah surmeni shemuni obrai eskramos asimuni yejhavera sakamos amishka misos demirai sakosa vehugogi vimorai safko Amen.
Samsu Sulenon Laon Yedonai Insom Natarto Indonai Sakami Vimei Mendina Itane Himari Moni
Yeah.
So now that we know that the avodah of the day is to try to bring out the trapped sparks of Kedusha, the trapped sparks of holiness that are embedded in Tisha B'Av. So how do we do this? So if we look at the Sfas Emes in number 7, the Sfas Emes writes, V'al yidei habechia v'hademaos nucha lahotzion min hahelem el hagalui be'efes mat. So Sfas Emes writes, with crying and with tears, you could bring out the hidden sparks, the hidden holiness of Tisha B'Av, from the dimension of the hidden into the dimension of the revealed. Sounds like an anomaly. You bring out simcha, you bring out the joy of the day through crying. But dear friends, let's talk about the power of tears, the power of dima, the power of bechi. Reb Tzaddik quotes in Sidkas HaTzadik in number 8, a beautiful medrash. We actually learned it in Shir just this past week. And Reb Tzaddik writes on the pasuk in Hosea, Kechu imachem devarim. Literally again, Kechu imachem devarim, take with you things, devarim. We'll see what devarim means. V'shuvu al Hashem, and return back to the Ribbon Shalom. And writes Reb Tzaddik, Lefi sheYisrael omrim Ribon ha'olam Nisim chotim u'mevi'in karban u'miskaper lahem. So Klal Yisrael says to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Ribbon Shalom, the Nisim, the princes, if they go ahead and they sin, they could bring a karban and find atonement. Mashiach chotim, maybe karban mispaker lo, the Kohen, the anointed Kohen, if he doesn't have Aveirah, he brings a karban and he's atoned for. Anu ein lanu karban. Klal Yisrael says, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, if we do something wrong, we have no atonement, we have no karban. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, what do you mean? Amar lahem, ves kol hadas yisrael yishku. It's not true. You have karbanos. Even if the entire assembly of Klal Yisrael sins, there are karbanos to bring. Amar le'aniyim anu ve'in lanu lahavi karbanos. Klal Yisrael says to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we're poor. We don't have karbanos. And the deeper meaning of the marriage is Klal Yisrael says to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but what happens when there is no Beis HaMikdash? What happens when we are Beis HaMikdash impoverished and we cannot go ahead and bring karbanos? What happens then? What happens then? Amar le dvarim ani mevakish. Kadosh Baruch Hu says to Klal Yisrael, I only ask dvarim. Shene'emar kichu imachem dvarim v'shuvu al Hashem v'ani mochel al kol avonosechem ve'in dvarim ela divrei Torah. And what are these dvarim? What are these words that HaKadosh Baruch Hu asks of us? Torah. So the Ribbon Shalom tells us, don't worry, even if you don't have a Beis HaMikdash, even if you don't have karbanos, just come back to me with Torah, and I will accept you. Amru lo ein anu yodin. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu, what happens if we don't know Torah? Ribbon Shalom, there will be times when things will be so difficult, that we won't even be able to learn Torah. The Piazetzna, who we'll quote a little bit later, Rav Kolomis Kama Shapira, the great and the holy Piazetzna, Hashem Yikom Damo, writes about this in one of his drushes in Eish Kodesh. How sometimes he says it feels like the worst punishment that has been leveled upon us is the closure of our shuls and our Batei Medrash. Because writes the Piazetzna, historically the Jew in times of distress and times of difficulty would run to the shul, would run to the Beis Medrash, open a Gemara, open a Sefer, and begin to learn. Say, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the schus of Torah, redeem us, help us. But what do you do, says the Piazetzna? The Batei Medrash are closed, when the shuls are locked down, what do you do then? So Klal Yisrael says, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but there will be times when we won't have Torah. So what do we do then? Amar lahem, bechu, v'yispalalu l'fanei v'ani mekabel. Just cry. Hear this? Even if you don't have karbanos, and even if you don't have a Beis HaMikdash, and even if you don't have a Beis Medrash, and even if you don't have Torah, the Baruch Hu says, just cry. Just cry. V'ani mekabel. Avosechem kishenishtabdu b'Mitzrayim lo b'tfila padisi osam. The Prophet says, when your ancestors were enslaved in Egypt, I didn't redeem them because they lodged heartfelt, meaningful, melodious prayers with Mishane Amar. Vay'anchu b'nei Yisrael min avoda vayizaku vatal shavasam ela Elokim. What sparked redemption from Egypt? It wasn't Klal Yisrael's tefillas. We didn't daven. We cried. But it was those very cries which moved the Ribono Shel Olam to action. B'mei Yoshua lo b'tefillah sislam nisim b'mei shoftim b'chiyah shamati b'mei Shmuel lo b'tefillah shamati lam v'chein anshe Yerushalayim af al pi shechisuni b'shil shebachu lifanei richamti alayim shene'emar, quotes the pasuk from Yirmiyahu, hare'ini mevakish mikem lo zvachim v'lo karbanos ela dvarim. Kadosh Baruch Hu says to us, I don't ask of you karbanos. I don't even ask of you tefillah. The only thing I ask of you are tears. The only thing I ask of you are tears. Shene'emar kichu imachem devarim v'shuvu al Hashem. Just bring tears. Says the Medrash, what does it mean? Kichu imachem devarim, bring with you things. What are the things? The things are tears. Just bring tears. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, that's all I ask of you. V'shuvu el Hashem. So the first step to actualizing the holiness of this day. Because I also remember again, our avot of this Tisha B'Av is a little bit different. See, I think in past years, our focus has been the bechi, the crying, and feeling the enormity of this loss. Collective loss of Am Yisrael, the individual loss of our destroyed Batei Mikdash, personal Batei Mikdash. But I think this year the Sfas Emes gives us a new dimension. The Ilu Zachinu dimension. This day, says the Sfas Emes, has so much holiness in it. Has so much light, has so much beauty, has so much aliyah. But it's obscured by the bad choices that went back to the Meraglim. It's obscured by the bad decisions that happened in times of Moshe Rabbeinu. But our job is to uncover, to remove the klippas, to remove the shells that obscure the light of this day and allow the light of Tisha B'Av to come out. So how do you allow the light of this day? Because isn't that what we want? I'm so tired of crying on this day. I'm so tired of living with all of this pain that I managed to keep in check. You ever wonder, I always find it interesting, Jews, it appears to me, cry very easily. This is not part of a scientific study. It's just a chush that I have. Jews cry. Jews cry at simchas. Jews cry at tsaras. Jews cry when there's ever something moving. Why? Because the truth is, all you need to do is scratch my surface a little bit, and you're going to find an overwhelming wellspring of pain. You don't see it day by day because they keep it covered, because you have to. But just scratch off a couple of, not even inches, a couple of millimeters on the surface, and you'll get to my wellspring of pain. It's there. The tears are there. So therefore says the Sfas Emes, if you want to go ahead and access the holiness of this day, says Reb Tzaddik, Al Yidei HaBechiyah, crying. But what's the power of crying? David HaMelech writes in Tehillim, this is in Perek Nun Vav Pasuk Tes, chapter 56, verse 9, Nudi Safarta, Ata Sima Dimasi Benotcha Halo B'Sifra Secha. Literally again, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, David HaMelech writes, he saves our tears. He saves our tears. Literally, can you imagine the scene? The Rebbe Shalom catches each and every one of my tears. No di safarta tasima dimasi benodecha. You put my tears in your receptacle. The Rebbe Shalom has a receptacle to catch the tears of Klal Yisrael because you count every single tear. Why is HaKadosh Baruch Hu saving my tears? Because I will say tears are the most genuine emotional expressions. Tears are the most genuine expression of emotion. You can fake a smile. Truth is, Most of us fake smiles all the time, right? Someone asks you how you're doing. What do you say? What do you say? Great. And you smile. No, you're not doing great. You want to know how I'm doing? I'm having problems with parnasa, problems with shalom bayis, problems with refuah, problems with this. But we all know very well, no one actually really wants to hear. When someone asks you how they're doing, it's a courteous exchange. They're asking how you're doing. They want you to say everything is fine so that they can move on with their life. So we know that. We all know that. So you smile, you say everything is fine, and then you move on with your life. But inside, so much. So a smile I could put on. We all put on smiles all the time, even when we don't want to smile. Tears are a genuine expression of emotion. So smiles, HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't collect. Smiles, HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't count. But tears, that genuine expression of emotion, the Ribono Shel Olam holds on to each and every one. Because there is nothing more genuine than the tear of a Jew. And so says the Sfas Emes, step number 1 of actualizing the holiness of this day, of removing the klippas, removing the shells that obscure the light of Tisha B'Av, is to cry genuine tears. So where do those tears come from? This goes back to what we said before. Those tears come from allowing you to feel the pain of the day. You see, we often are conditioned to think that pain is not something you're supposed to feel. The goal is to take away pain. Right? That's the goal. You shouldn't feel pain, which makes sense. I go to the dentist. I don't want to feel them filling the cavity. I have to get surgery. I don't want to feel the surgery. I suffer from emotional issues. I don't want to feel the overwhelming internal feelings of pain. That's how we're conditioned. That pain is something that ultimately you try to rid yourself of. And it makes sense, and that is true in many, many things. Meaning there's no mitzvah to feel the root canal. And there's no mitzvah if a person goes ahead and suffers from some type of emotional or psychiatric, to leave that untreated. There's no mitzvah to leave the pain as is. You should treat it. But there is some pain that you are supposed to allow yourself to feel. There is some pain that you have to allow to permeate to your core. There is some pain that you have to experience, because if you don't, you're denying a piece of who you are. You know, Rahman al-Islam, when a person has to bury a loved one, you know, the halachos of burial in Yiddishkeit are very simple. Very simple, one word. It's raw. Right? When we bury the dead, we do not put the greens over the mounds of earth. We do not lay beautiful wreaths. Why? Because do you know why they put those things of grass over the mound of dirt? You ever wonder why they didn't? You've been to Levi's, do you ever wonder why people do that? Because nobody wants to see the mound of earth. Because I don't want to see that there's going to be a mound of earth go on the body of my loved one. I don't want to see it. And why does everyone love flowers? Because flowers are beautiful. Flowers beautify everything. Flowers have a way. Flowers represent life, vitality, beautiful. So I don't want to focus on the death, but what does Chazal say? We don't put the greens on top of the mound of earth. And we fill in the earth ourselves. And our minhag is that we don't really put flowers by graves. Because at the end of the day, you must feel the pain of loss. Because if you don't allow yourself to feel that grief, if you don't allow yourself to feel that loss, you're denying yourself something so important and so pivotal. And so on Tisha B'Av, there is a mitzvah to cry. Because crying represents the idea that you are allowing yourself to feel loss. Don't blunt the pain. Not today. Today is not the day for a stoic expression. Today is not the day to say someone else's pain, someone else's sar, and I read it like someone else's story. Today is the day where you allow the pain to course through your veins, like it's happening to your loved ones, like it's happening to you, like it's happening right now. I've quoted before from Celia Klein, who wrote this book, Poems of the Holocaust. She wrote another poem, which I'm going to share with you. It's called Danny, and I'm going to give you the background to this poem. Celia Klein came from a Hungarian family, from the city of Budapest. And in Budapest, the Hungarian Jews in general were spared from the ravages of the war until really 1944, until the end of the war. But when the Nazi beast caught up with them, they were disposed of in an incredibly methodical and quick fashion. So she describes arriving at Auschwitz. She arrived at Auschwitz with a very large family. 42 members of her family arrived, 4 survived. She discusses how she arrived at Auschwitz with her. She discusses specifically her mother and her sister Minna. And her sister Minna had a little boy. His name was Danny. I don't know what the Hungarian equivalent of that was. In the poem she calls him Danny. And as soon as they got off the train, the cattle cars, someone ran over to Mrs. Klein's mother, and she says, you know what's going to happen to you and that little boy. And the person pointed to the crematorium, to the gas chambers in Auschwitz. She said, that's where they're going to take you and that little boy today. And the person just walked away. So Mrs. Klein writes that her mother realized the person was telling her the MS. So she had to make a choice in that moment. You see, if her daughter, the mother of this little boy, were holding the little boy, then both of them would have been sent to their deaths in the gas chambers. So listen to what this mother does. The mother goes over to her daughter, Minna. She says, let me hold the baby. Let me hold the baby. It's been a long journey, it's been a long ride. I'll hold the baby. I'm sure they're going to have Rahmanas on the older people and the babies. It's better if you leave the baby with me. Minna, the mother, first objects, I don't want to let go of my son. And the mother, the grandmother of Danny, says, no, let me take the baby. So she takes the baby and she goes off. She stands in line for selection. Mrs. Klein and her sister Minna are sent to the right, to life. And the grandmother, Mrs. Klein's mother, and the baby are sent to the left. Minna did not realize what her mother had done until that moment. She didn't realize that her mother knew what was going to happen to the baby, and whoever was holding the baby was going to share the fate of the baby. So a mother makes a choice to save her daughter's life at the expense of her own and the expense of her grandchild. You see, she knew her grandson was not going to survive. There was no place for children in Auschwitz. There was no place for children in Auschwitz. Children were a nuisance. Children were unneeded. They were unnecessary. So if her daughter was holding the child, her daughter and the child would perish. The child was gone no matter what. But if she would hold the child, she would save her daughter. If these were not the stories of our people, you would think to yourself, it must be fiction. It's impossible. It's impossible that a story like this occurred in the Ribono Shel Olam's universe. It's impossible that a mother has to make a calculation to take her grandson out of her daughter's arms in order to save her daughter. It's impossible that a story like this happened. But it did. Rabbi said, how do you hear a story like this? And not cry an ocean of tears. So Mrs. Klein wrote a poem about this. The poem is called Danny. That's the title. When they took you with your grandson Danny, did he cry for his mommy? This poem, my sister, you must not read, because your heart never ceases to bleed. It would just make you so much sadder. But I must write, since it makes me feel better. Don't cry, sister dear. You still have me, and I'll remain near. They've killed your little son, but I wasn't going to let them make it 6,000,001. For I was determined to keep you alive. So we gave them our mother as a bribe. I wanted so much for us to live, and when we made it, I thought it was God's gift. I was telling you stories about their flight when I knew they had been killed. They had killed them that very night. I hope you forgive me for this big fib. I told you they just went on a trip. You just kept staring into space. I tried so hard your thoughts to trace. I used to give you my food, and people would say how her sister is good. They didn't know the debt I pay for persuading you with me to stay. To force you to live become my goal, though I knew I can't ever heal your soul. When you used to lose complete control, I would start out with my protocol. You want us to end. Is this what you want us to do? You would say, better quick than die so slow. I wasn't easily persuaded. From electric wires slowly back I guided. I would promise you someday soon that I'll go with you tomorrow at noon. So I kept you alive day after day. And this is how we came to stay. Now I visit you every year, and I'm grateful for having one, sister dear. We never talk about that time, as though we had committed a crime. Remember, please, Danny and mother could not be saved, and you would have been for the Germans another grave. Here are the words of a sister. So the rest of the story that she tells in her introduction is that after her sister Minna realized what happened, she wanted to go run and be with her mother and her son. What mother, any mother, will share the fate of the child? And her sister, Mrs. Klein, held her back. Held her back. She would not let her join the mother and the child. And she writes in other poems as well how her sister was angry at her. How could you have kept me from my child? How could you have kept me from my mother? If I was to die, I should have died with them. Her sister did survive, and her sister did rebuild the life, but that last paragraph, we don't speak about these days. We don't speak about them. And the truth is, for us as well, over the course of time, we don't speak about them either so much, because it's too overwhelming. But this is how we cry. Well, say, allow the pain to become your own. It's not someone else's pain. These stories are your stories. These people are your people. This is not something that happened 70, 80 years ago that you could just simply write off as a historical reality. Feel it as if it were your own. Tears have the incredible ability to cleanse. Tears have the incredible ability to go ahead and pave the way for something new. You know, people say, like a good cry. Person has a good cry, you feel better after a good cry. But not because now you've erased all of the pain. But once you allow yourself to embrace the pain, to feel the pain, to allow the pain to become part of you, you're now ready to move on. You're now ready to rebuild. So if we want to unlock the hidden light of Tisha B'Av, to get to that peak, requires us first to go through the valley. I'll share with you one other piece before we say another Kinnos. There was another incredible book that I read this past year. It was I included it here in page, I don't know what page it is in the booklet, in the, sorry. Page 26 in your packet. And this, I think, is required reading. It's called Hope is the Last to Die. It's a biography written by a woman, Helena Birnbaum, also still alive today. She is a well-known author and lecturer on the Holocaust. And she discusses over here really something. Her book is incredibly amazing. Now, what struck me about her book is there are no lack of incredible Holocaust books. But what really struck me about her book is she is a survivor. She was born in 1929 in Warsaw. And she describes a little bit of her life in Warsaw. And having just taken a trip to Poland last summer, a lot of the things that she described were actually things that we saw. She was taken, over the course of the war, she was in Majdanek, Auschwitz, and Ravensbrück. She was 11 years old at the start of the war. And she writes her memoir through the eyes of an 11-year-old. And it's incredible. It's truly incredible. And the truth is, I guess I found it very gripping because I have an 11-year-old daughter. And when reading her book, the way she writes with such childlike simplicity and literally trying to recreate her experiences. You know, sometimes things happen to us as children, and when we tell them over, but from an adult lens. She tells it over from the child's lens. I was so taken, because throughout reading this book, I saw in my mind's eye an 11-year-old. I thought of my daughter. I thought of her. And she describes many things throughout her book. But I want to show you something amazing. Take a look. Take a look first at number 17 on your sheet. She writes, "My mother stroked my head, comforted and soothed me." So she's talking about when they arrived at Majdanek. So they arrive at Majdanek, she's in line with her mother and her sister-in-law and a cousin. "My mother stroked my head, comforted and soothed me. Just a little more patience," she said, "and soon they will take us to the bathhouse. We'll wash and change our clothes, and then we'll go into the camp. To the huts you can see beyond the barbed wire. We'll rest there, and they'll surely assign us to work in the fields." "You don't think they will kill us?" I asked. Friends, do you understand? This is an 11-year-old asking a question. You don't think they'll kill us? Could we imagine? Can we? The contrast is just so overwhelming. I know the questions that 11-year-olds ask. Because Baruch Hashem, I'm privileged to have my youngest 11. I've had all of my children, thank God, go through that age. You don't think they'll kill us? And can you imagine being in a situation as an adult? Your child asks you that question. Her mother was lying to her. Her mother knew what was happening. You don't think they'll kill us? Of course not, she replied. After all, we saw women prisoners in prison dress on the way here. Now you can see them in the distance behind the camp wires. Will there be beds in the huts? Blankets and food? I asked. Persuaded by my mother's words, I began daydreaming about a bath and the hut where I would rest, eat my fill, and get warm. The slowness with which the line was moving was agitating me. How much more time would it take before we got to the bathhouse, into which the SS kept leading more and more groups of women? How could I have foreseen that these hours in the empty space in front of the bathhouse were the last I was to spend with my mother? That these were the last hours of her life, and I wanted to hasten on the moment of entering the bathhouse and the camp. Yet how could I have known? Finally, our turn arrived. The stormtroopers added Hella, Helena, me, and Ido Wilner, Hella's cousin, thanks to whom we had obtained places in the Mila Street bunker to a group. Remembering Hilik's admonition not to lean on my mother, Hilik was her brother, who they were separated from, who was killed during the war. She did not know that yet. I took the arm of my cousin, a tall, plump girl who offered it to me. She did not survive my danik, but was one of the first of our group to die in the camp. My mother walked behind us with Hella, and I did not even look around to see what was happening to them. Being absorbed in setting down my own feet, each step caused me incredible pain. To this day, I do not know how and when I found myself inside a large hut, piled to the ceiling with heaps of clothes and shoes. The Nazis ordered us to strip naked and throw everything except our shoes on this pile. At this point, Hella exchanged her light shoes for a pair of high-top boots, which she had slipped furtively out of the pile. She winked at me to do the same, but I was afraid and too exhausted. I no longer needed anything. I did not even have the strength to think of my wretched shoes. Driven on by hundreds of naked women, I eventually reached a shower. A bath, I thought joyfully. So this was the bathhouse, which meant we would soon be in a warm hut. My mother was right. They were not going to kill us. We would live and work. How good that was. I wanted to throw myself into my mother's arms for joy, to tell her of my love and complete faith in everything she said. I looked around, seeking her in the crowd of women under the showers, but she was not there. I began looking for her more frantically. I could see Hella, her cousin Helena, but my mother was not there. Where is my mother? My head reeled. There was a lump in my throat. I could not get the question out. Where is my mother? I finally managed to whisper, turning to my sister-in-law. Hella looked at me. I saw her unhappy face. Then she looked away, and although she spoke quietly, I distinctly heard her say, "She is not here." I felt as though my hands and feet had suddenly been cut off. Yet I still did not understand the meaning of her 4 words. I had not seen them take away my mother, nor how it happened, nor why. Besides, all our friends from the Umschlag were here. My mother was young. With her pink cheeks, she looked much healthier and prettier, or it seemed to me, than many other women. Yet they had taken her? Why? I could not come to terms in any way with the thought that she was really not here, that I would never see her again. I kept looking at the door. She should be coming in any minute to embrace and comfort me. But my mother did not come in. I moved in a circle like an automaton, repeating mechanically, "My mother is not here." Everything else stopped existing for me. I was incapable of anything, even tears. When they handed out clothing that had to be put on quickly without drying ourselves, Hella energetically took care of me, seeing that I was half conscious. "From now on, I am your mother. Do you understand that?" she said firmly. You know, if you've ever as a child gotten lost or separated from your parents, you know the incredible fear that goes through your mind. Even it might feel only be for 2 minutes, but it feels like an eternity. But yet the child always knows deep down, my parents are going to find me. My parents are going to find me. There's a story that's told that Rabbi Shlomo Carlebach composed the tune from Melech Rachamon. They say that they asked him where he got the inspiration for that tune, because the words themselves are strange words. Melech Rachamon Rachim Aleinu Tov Umeitiv Hidaresh Lanu. Because we ask Kadosh Baruch Hu to seek us out, to find us. What a chutzpah. You want HaKadosh Baruch Hu, go find him. What do you mean? He daresh lanu. You should seek us out. So Shlomo said that he was once traveling and he was in an airport, and he saw a young man who looked exceptionally disheveled, looked a little bit homeless, and He saw the young man, buy a payphone. You can see it's a dated story. There used to be such a thing, it was called a payphone. You could Google it. And the young man was making a phone call. And somebody says hello on the other line. He just starts sobbing. And Rav Shlomo was able to go ahead and construct from the phone call, I guess from eavesdropping a little bit, that this boy had run away from home. And he was calling his parents because he wanted to come home. And he hears the voice on the line say, just tell us where you are and we'll come get you. And the boy starts sobbing. And he says, Dad, I don't know where I am, but you just have to come find me. Reb Shlomo said in that moment, he thought of the words, Melech Rachamon, Rachem Aleinu. Tov u'meitiv hidaresh lanu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, sometimes I don't know where I am. I don't know where I am. But I just know that I need you to come and get me. I know that I need you to come and find me. So how do we not cry for the 11-year-old Helena who is in the hell of Maidanek? And the one comfort that she had in this world, the one comfort, was a mother. And we'll see more about her mother a little bit later. But a mother who tried to protect her from the harsh realities of Warsaw, of the Warsaw Ghetto. A mother who shielded her with her body from beatings. And a mother who filled her with hope and optimism. Now in a split second, without an opportunity to say goodbye, without an opportunity for any last words of chizik, for a last I love you, for a last embrace, a little 11-year-old girl is all alone in this world. All alone in this world. Unless you think that those feelings of loneliness go away. So you say, okay, she's 11 years old. And Baruch Hashem, she was one of the fortunate ones because she had other relatives. She had an incredible sister-in-law. Her sister-in-law had died in the concentration camp. But her sister-in-law was responsible for her survival, for Alina's survival. But lest you think that this pain goes away, I'll share with you another poem by Mrs. Klein. It's called Mother. Remember, we just told you the story before. She knew, Mrs. Klein knew that when her mother took the grandson, the little baby Danny, she knew what her mother was doing. But she could not divulge it to her sister. So she writes a poem called Mother. I read it to you. It says, Mother, Mother, stay by my side and share in our joy and in our pride. Today we are marrying off our son. His bride is so lovely. I'll make believe you are not dead. Today is the day I don't want to be sad. Mother, Mother, put on your dress. The wedding is starting in an hour or less. Your grandson is walking down the aisle. Everything is in the grandest style. Mother, Mother, you will not have to stay. Just be at my side. While for his happiness we pray. You missed out on the years when he was a child. Please come today and meet his bride. You left me. You left me when I needed you most. Come today and let's drink a toast. You would have been so proud to see when our son received his doctor's degree. Let's celebrate with our happy pair. I love him so much and I do so care.
He is so handsome and so wonderful too. Please, just today, don't make me feel blue. Mother, mother, remove the lump in my throat so I can greet my guests and not be choked. Take away the heaviness from my heart and help me, please, to make a new start. Mother, mother, can you do this for me? I promise to be grateful eternally. Everyone is so happy and gay. Your favorite music has started to play. There are so many people and I search every face, but no one can ever fill your place. Your absence left a terrible mark. Even this lighted hall seems so dark. Mother, mother, don't be so sad. It really is not all that bad. Now I promise to let you rest. The wedding is over, and gone are the guests. Because the trauma of being split apart for all eternity from your mother doesn't end at 11, and it doesn't end at 111. It's a pain that you take with you throughout your entire life. You find this dynamic in Mrs. Birnbaum, Mrs. Klein's books. Young girls forced to separate from a loving mother and never able to fill that gaping hole. There are scars that follow you everywhere in life. And there are scars that just never heal. And sometimes not only do they not heal, but things occur which just rip them back open. And so today says Rab Tzadok, cry. Don't cry for someone else's loss. Cry for your loss. Feel the pain as if it's your own. Know that your tears are important to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, for He saves each and every one of them in His divine flask, specifically set aside for the tears of Am Yisrael. Cry, says the Sasamas, because Ayidea Bechia V'Hademaos Nucha L'Hotzian Menahelim. Because it's only through tears that you can bring out the true light of this day. You know how when you cry, your vision becomes blurred. And then when you wipe your eyes, there's like a rush of light that comes in. That's Tisha B'Av. Cry the tears. And for a little while, our vision will be blurred. But when we dry our eyes, we will be able to see the great light that is hidden in this day. We'll now recite. There's feedback here. Echo. We'll now recite Kinnos Zayin. Do you have a tune you're doing for Zion? Do you have a tune? אשר תיקנתו לסמי מלכות. Hoyom. So continuing a little bit and how we bring out the light on this Tisha B'Av. I want to share with you an additional idea. If you take a look at number 9 on your sheet, find over here an incredible piece by the Piazetzna. So this is in Parshas Noach in 1939. So the Rebbe gave this over in the ghetto, and I mentioned I was talking about the Piazetzna many years. I think a couple of years ago, we actually devoted Kinnos morning, the majority of the time, to the Piazetzna. The Piazetzna is an incredible individual. Rav Kinnos Kalman Shapiro, who was a child prodigy, a very well-respected Talmid Chacham, Rebbe already from a very young age. And the Rebbe on Shabbos in the Warsaw Ghetto would go ahead and deliver a drasha. And again, depending on the week, he would deliver the drasha to the people there. Sometimes he wouldn't be able to deliver it to an audience because people weren't allowed to congregate. And after Shabbos, for this many times, so the Rebbe would record the drasha. A little bit of a historical debate as to who exactly wrote down the drashas. Was it the Rebbe himself? Was it a Gabbai? Some combination of the two. In any event, they would record the drush after Shabbos because the Rebbe understood that these drushas were incredibly important and had to be preserved for the future, so that future generations should know what Jews lived through, what Jews experienced, and how they were able to maintain a connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and to learn from Torah, even if they couldn't always learn Torah, but to learn from Torah, even during the darkest of times. So the Rebbe buried the manuscripts in a canister. The canister was buried in the Warsaw Ghetto. The Rebbe did not survive the war, neither did his mishpacha. But after the war, the canister was found, and the manuscript was put together in a Sefer Eish Kodesh. The Rebbe himself was a man who suffered incredibly. The Rebbe lost his wife. His wife actually passed away before the war. She's buried in the Warsaw cemetery. But over the course of the war, he lost his son, he lost his daughter-in-law, he lost his daughter, he lost his mother, he lost everything. But despite all of his incredible and overwhelming losses, the Rebbe himself became a pillar of inspiration. An individual who set up a system of soup kitchens, underground yeshivas and shuls to be able to take care of the physicality and of the spirituality of Am Yisrael even in these dark times. And you see through his sifrit, you see through his drashas, just what an incredible individual he was. I want to share with you just a piece from his drasha in Parshas Noach. So here the Rebbe writes, I put the sources of his drasha actually on the next page, on 10 and 11, because the truth is the drasha is actually totally made up of a Gemara and a Maharsha. So you can see it over here on the next page in the packet. It Source number 10. So the Gemara tells a story. Tan Rabbanan, Masa b'shnei b'nei Adam shenishbu b'hara Carmel. The Gemara tells a story about two Jews who were taken captive. This is during the times of the Churban in Hara Carmel. Hara Carmel, of course, again is the site of Eliyahu's great revelation, the Shonah with Nevi Habal. So two Jews who were taken captive by Hara Carmel. The captor was walking behind the captives. So the two Jews are talking. And then one of the Jews says to the other, the camel that's walking in front of us, he's blind, the camel's blind in one eye. And the camel's carrying two skins, and one holding wine, one holding oil. There are two people, the two people leading the camel. One is Jewish, one is not Jewish. So the captor is walking behind him, and the captor hears this happening. He hears their exchange. He says, Amr lahem, am kishe oref, you stiff-necked people. May ayin atiyah, and tell me, how do you know all that? All those things you just said, how do you know all of that? So they said very simple, Amr lo gamal, me'asam shlefana mitzad shira ochelas, mitzad she'ena ra ein ochelas. The camel is very simple. We notice that the camel only eats from one side. From one side. From the other side, doesn't eat. It must mean that what? It has sight in one eye, doesn't have sight in the other eye. So it eats from the side on which it has sight. Next, Shnei b'nei Adam, utun shtei nodos, is carrying two skins, one of wine, one of oil. How do we know? Because there's stuff dripping out of the skins. We see on one side the liquid gets absorbed into the ground, the other side it doesn't. That must mean one side it's oil, doesn't get absorbed, it floats, it stays on the top of the ground, and one side it's wine that gets absorbed. Ushnei b'nei Adam hamanhigin, also the two people are leading the donkey, one Jew, one non-Jewish. Very simple. The Jew kind of goes into the brush to go ahead and relieve himself, whereas the non-Jew relieves himself right on the road. So Radav hachareim, so the captor hears all of this. He goes, he checks it out for himself, and indeed everything that the Jews said was correct. Bo v'nashkan al roshan. He kisses, this is the captor, kisses the two Jewish captives on their head. Ve'eviyim lebeison, he brings them to his home. Va'asal lahen su'uda gidola, he made for them a great meal. V'haya meraked lifneim, and he was dancing, as the captor is dancing in front of the captives. Va'amru, Baruch shebachar bizaro shel Avram. Blessed is he who chooses the offspring of Abraham. V'nosal mechachmaso, he gives them of his wisdom, of God's wisdom. Wherever they go, they become a master. They become a master for their masters. And the captor released the two Jewish captives and sent them on their way. An incredible Gemara. So the Marsha in number 11 says, I don't understand. Why is it, see, after the captor hears about the insights of the captive, so what does he say? He says, Am kishe oref. You are a stiff-necked people. So why is that the response? You're a stiff-necked people. Why is that the response? So the Marsha says something amazing. If you skip down to the last two lines, this is the part that the Rebbe quotes. The last two lines, She'ein umazu ki uma acheres. Aval bocha bezaro shel Avram b'nasan lechachmaso va'al kin chachmasan nitzchis shelo tishtachach mehen af begalusan. Says the Marsha something amazing. See, the way it works with wisdom is like this, that often even wise people, when confronted with difficult circumstances, tend to lose their wisdom. Right? When we are confronted with difficult circumstances, we tend to stop thinking rationally. We tend to become irrational beings. And yet the Shavoy, the captor, was so amazed that these Jews, in the midst of being led away, these Jews in the midst of such difficult and tumultuous circumstances, they still have chachma, they still have wisdom. They're still looking at these situations and trying to find the deeper meaning. So the captor was so taken by this that he frees them, he releases them, and he sets them off on their way. And the Piazetzna writes about this. The Piazetzna says there's an incredible lesson for life. Sometimes in the midst of suffering, sometimes in the midst of difficulty, we lose our mind, we lose our wits,
and we lose rational thought. But it's so important that even in the midst of difficult times, we find a way to keep thinking. We find a way to remain methodical. We find a way to keep our wits about us. And we find a way to remain contemplative, thoughtful beings. And the reason why this is incredibly important, and I'm including in this Tisha B'Av morning, and of course you understand, the Rebbe was talking to the congregation of the brokenhearted. The Rebbe was talking to his Balabatim in the Warsaw Ghetto. And what he was really saying to them was, it's easy to give up, and it's easy to throw in the towel, and it's easy to be done, but you can't. You can't. You see those Jews who were taken captive, they were also at the end of their line. But yet, they looked at things in a critical way. Yet, they did not abdicate the intellect. Yet, they did not give up. So the Rebbe giving chizuk to the Jews of the Warsaw Ghetto. Don't throw in the towel. Don't stop thinking. Don't stop looking. Don't stop analyzing. Don't stop trying to grow. Don't go ahead and lose your wits even in the midst of difficult circumstances. Don't lose your head. And I think this is so incredibly important because yes, our first avoda of the day is crying. That is, the tears. Like the Sfas Emes said, the tears unlock the light. The tears unlock the holiness. The tears wash away the klippas, wash away the shells. The tears wipe away the ilu zachino, the ili acholti, and allow us to tap into the true holiness of this day. And my dear friends, today is a day when we cry for that which has been lost, when we cry for the birds that we've let slip through our hands. But today is also a day when we have to think about rebuilding. Because today I mourn my Beis HaMikdash. Because it's hard for me to relate to a temple that I never knew, that my parents never knew, that my grandparents never knew, that for 2,000 years we have not known. But there is a temple that I can relate to. There's a Beis HaMikdash that I can relate to. And that's the Bilvavi Mishkan Evne. That's the Beis HaMikdash inside of me. And so today when I cry, I don't just cry for our historical temple which was destroyed 2,000 years ago. And I don't just cry for the mother of Alina Birnbaum or for the mother of Cecilia Klein. Or I don't just cry for that little beautiful boy who's being tormented by that Nazi who's taking his precious payas in his hand. I cry for me because I've also destroyed. Because I've also taken a beautiful, pristine Beis HaMikdash and I've also destroyed it. My potential, my abilities, what I could have been, what I could have done. Vosai, I'm sure it's not only me. But don't you ever have those moments when perhaps you're alone with yourself and you think to yourself, what I could have been. What I could have been. Most of us don't like doing it because it's a little bit painful. But what I could have been had I applied myself a bit more in yeshiva. What I could have been had I been present a little bit more as my children were growing up. What I could have been had I taken the time to be mechamed my parents properly while they were still in this world. What could have been had I invested myself a bit more into myself. What could have been had I taken those opportunities that were filled with such potential, but I was just too busy to pay attention with them. What I could have been had I reined in my desires, my proclivities, my wants. What I could have been had I found a way to stop always giving in to hate and to passion and to desire. But had the koach to exert mastery over myself. But I didn't do a lot of those things. And as a result, my Beis HaMikdash also lies in ruin. So says the Sfas Emes, yes, cry. Cry. But says the Piazetzna, and we hear all of their voices today. All of their voices. If you close your eyes and you open your heart, you're going to hear the Sfas Emes telling you to cry. And you're going to hear Reb Tzaddik telling you that there is nothing purer than a tear. And you're going to hear David HaMelech telling you that every single tear is saved by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And you're going to hear the Piazetzna telling you, but don't lose yourself in the crying. You also have to think, And what do you have to think about on this day? How do I want to rebuild? How do I want to rebuild? How do I want to build my Beis HaMikdash? Because you see, my friends, I want to tell you something amazing. There is no one of us who has the ability single-handedly to rebuild the Bayis Shlishi today. We don't. Collectively, we have an ability to do it. But there's no one of us by us. I can't decide, you know what? I'm rebuilding Bayis Shlishi. I could do my chelik, each of us have a part, but I can't do it on my own. There's only one structure in this world that you have the ability to raise, to demolish, and then to put back up instantaneously. And that's the Bilvavi Mishkan Evne. That's your Mikdash. You could demolish it as many of us have done over the years. And the amazing part is I could destroy my Beis HaMikdash like that. But I could also rebuild it not like that. It takes time to rebuild. But if I put my mind to it, I can rebuild my personal Mikdash today. So that by the time I say V'hurachum, the fast is almost over. In just a couple of hours, it's over. Most of it is behind us already. There's very little time left. But if you put your mind to it, I could rebuild my Mikdash today. So that by the time I say V'hurachum, by the time this day ends, Halavai the Bayis Shlishi will be built. But even if the Bayis Shlishi is not built, my Beis HaMikdash can be built. I can do that today. Says the Piazetzna. But that's only if you cry with intellect. Only if you cry with confidence. Only if you cry, but at the same time keep rational thought about you and figure out what you want to do, how you want to build, and how you want to grow. A song? Kinnos? Which Kinnos? We'll now recite Kinnos Yud Zayin together. Page 6 in the packet. Continuing with the idea that the Piagetna teaches us that after we cry, our job then becomes to figure out what to do. I want to draw your attention to source number 12 on your sheet. See here, the Gemara says, Gemara that we're all familiar with. Mikdash Rishon mipnei macharav. Why was the Beis Hamikdash destroyed? Mipnei shlosha dvarim shahayu bo. Because there were three different things that happened there. Avodah Zarah, Gila Raya, Sheikhus Dam, three cardinal sins: idolatry, immorality, murder. That's what caused the destruction of the first Beis Hamikdash. Mikdash Sheni, Shahayu Oskim B'Torah Mitzvos Gemilas Chasad Me'Macharav. But the second Beis Hamikdash, where they were proficient in all of these things, they were doing mitzvahs, learning Torah, Chesed. Why was it destroyed? Mipnei Shahai Sabo Sinas Chinam. Because there was baseless hatred. Baseless hatred. Lamdecha. Sheshkula sinas chinam keneged shalosh averos avodah zarah gila rayas shlichos damim. And it teaches us that ultimately sinas chinam, baseless hatred, discord, animosity, infighting, is as destructive and as terrible as the three cardinal averos, the three cardinal sins. So we know the halachas. In 13 and 14, the Shulchan Aruch writes, "V'tisha b'av asher likras b'Torah b'nevim ksuvim." Not allowed to learn Torah on Tisha B'Av, except matters related, of course, to Avelus. And in number 14, She'elas Shalom. She'elas Shalom l'chavero, I'm sorry, in She'elas Shalom l'chavero b'Tisha B'Av. We're not allowed to greet each other with a normal Shalom Aleichem. And the Yavitz, Rabbi Yonasan Eibush, asks a very simple question. I don't understand. You told me that the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed because of Sinas China, because of animosity. So wouldn't you think that not only should She'elah Shalom, greeting another Jew, not only should it be permitted, but it should be encouraged? After all, again, isn't that the beginning of friendship? Isn't that the beginning of harmonious relationships? The ability to greet another person when you see them? And yet, the halacha is that it's asr. You're not allowed to say Shalom Aleichem. It's strange. It's strange for most of us. It's probably one of the hardest things on Tisha B'Av, besides not eating and drinking. But it's so natural to greet people. It's especially people you're close with, you love. But yet, no She'elah Shalom. And again, Torah. Torah is what creates character. Torah is what creates proper identity. So one would have thought that if the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed because of Sinas Chinam, why would you answer these things? You should answer Lashon Hara. I know Lashon Hara is answer every day, but not everybody accepts that halacha. I said, make a Lashon Hara answer today. But here I'm going to go ahead and I'm answering She'elah Shalom, I'm answering Talmud Torah. Doesn't make sense. And he amplifies the question. Take a look at number 15. There's a dramatic Gemara, this dramatic story in Maseches Gittin. Amar Rav Yehuda Marav, Mai Dichsiv, Va'ashku Gibor Beisav Ish Nachalaso, Mai Seba Adam Echad Shenasan Einav Be'eshes Rabo. There was a story of a man who coveted the wife of his master. Rabbi, in this case, you're going to see, really means this man was apprenticing by someone, and he desired the wife of the man whom he was apprenticing for. Vishuli de Nagrahavi, and he was a blacksmith, a carpenter's apprentice. So Pamachos, Hutzach Rabbi Lava. So here's what's interesting. In the story, the apprentice was wealthy, but he was studying under the master in order to learn the trade. So one time the master needed a loan. So he turns to the apprentice. So he turns to the apprentice for the loan, and the apprentice says, "Sure. Amrlo shagar ishtecha etzli valvana. Send your wife to my house, and I'll give her the money." Shiger ishta eslo. So the master sends his wife to the apprentice's home. Sha ima shlosh yamim, and she stayed there for 3 days. Okay. Kadnu aba etzlo. So what happened? So the master then comes to the apprentice's house, and he says, "Did you see my wife? She went missing." Amrlo ishti sheshigarti l'chahechani. Amrlo ani patrasia la'alter v'shamati shatinokos nis alalu baba derech. Oh, I sent her home immediately. She came to my house. I gave her the money. I sent her on her way. But I heard some bad rumors I heard that she was engaging in some immoral behavior with some of the local young men. So the Gemara says, Ma'asa. So the master turns to the apprentice and says, what do you think I should do? He says, if you listen to me, I would divorce her. She's obviously a woman of very little moral character, divorce her. Amar lo, so the master says, even if I wanted to, ksuvasa maruba, she has a very expensive ksuva, so I can't really afford to get divorced. Amar lo, to which the apprentice says, no problem. Ani alavecha v'tein la ksuvasa. I'll lend you the money. We're friends. I'll lend you the money, that way you could divorce her and move on. Amad zeh v'garsha. So the master divorces his wife, pays out the ksuba with the loan he got from his apprentice, and what happens? Halachu v'nasa. The apprentice goes and marries the woman. So the apprentice, obviously a very devious individual, spread, malicious rumors about this woman, got his master to divorce her, and then he in turn marries her. The story gets worse. But now remember, the master, in order for him to divorce his wife, needed to borrow money from the apprentice. The loan comes due, right? The loan comes due. The apprentice comes to the master, knew it was time to pay up. And he said, Amar lo bava asimi b'chovcha. So the apprentice says, listen, it's okay, we're friends. Don't worry about it. You'll work off your debt. You'll be my butler. So the master now comes to the apprentice's house to be his butler. V'hayuhem yoshvin v'ochlin v'shosin. V'haya omet umashke aleya. Difference, could you imagine the scene? So the apprentice and his new wife are sitting eating, and who's serving them? None other than the master. The master, realizing that he was deceived, sitting here now serving his former wife and his apprentice. V'hayu dema'os noshros me'enov. The tears fell out of the apprentice's, of the butler, of the master's eyes. V'noflos b'kosehen, and would fall into the cups of the apprentice and of his new wife. V'al osa sha'a nischatem gizardin. And in that moment, the gizardin, the decree that the Beis HaMikdash would be destroyed and Am Yisrael sent into exile, that was decreed and sealed then. And again, ask Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz, but I don't understand, what does that mean? That's not what the Gemara said. The Gemara said that the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed because of Sinas Chinam, because in the Sinas Chinam, in the second Beis HaMikdash, Gila Rai, Shichus Tam Avodah Zarah. In the first, so what's happening over here? So if you take a look, if you turn the page to page 16, so I saw this Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz quoted in the Be'era Parsha, son of the Lalav Rebbe, and he writes something so beautiful here. He writes, this whole thing doesn't make sense. So let's think about this for just a moment. When we read this story, there's no doubt that we see the apprentice as a very devious, underhanded, morally bankrupt individual. But if somebody were to ask you, what Aveira did the apprentice violate, what would you say? None. On a technical level, maybe it's Lifnei Iver, right? He placed a stumbling block. But at the end of the day, he orchestrated circumstances so that his master would divorce his wife, and that ultimately, again, that the apprentice would be able to marry her. He doesn't do anything with a married woman. He waits till she's divorced. So that's it. So what did he technically do wrong? Aside from a couple of stumbling blocks, one could say that his technical behavior was in the realm of legality. He goes on, Lapir Shayavitz, Zal, Mikanira, Barur, Sheyesh Avon She'ina Mefurash Mavor B'Shum Makom. So the Ayvit says, Yevanos and Ayvish says, sometimes there are Averas that are not explicit. Sometimes there are Averas that are not explicitly articulated in the tome of the Talmud or in a code of Jewish law. V'hu chamor ma'od v'sanoi be'inei hamakom yoser me'averos chamuros. And these very Averos, which are not articulated or written down anywhere, could sometimes be more despicable in the eyes of HaKadosh Baruch Hu than anything else. Lahanish harabim ba'avuro b'shil shein choshishin lo klal im heyosem misnaged l'seichel. Why are these Averos so terrible? Because people don't even realize that they're doing something wrong. V'hu mipnei shu davar matmid b'pirsum b'chlal man desanilach l'chavercha lo sabit. Right, Rabbi Yonasan Eibeshitz? Because when it comes to interpersonal relationships, the guiding light principle is, like Hillel said in the Mesechus Shabbos, Madisani alecha lichavercha lo sadit. Whatever you don't want done unto yourself, don't do unto others. Was the apprentice's behavior illegal? It's quite possible not. But was it an avera? Unequivocally, yes. And right, Rabbi Yonasan Eibish, it's because there's an unwritten part of the Torah. There's a moral code that HaKadosh Baruch Hu expects to be intuitive. Don't do unto others what you don't want done unto you. Don't treat people in a way that you don't want to be treated. And says Rabbi Yonasan Eibish, he says something absolutely amazing. Skip to the left-hand paragraph. Al pizeh. Yevuar madua astru biyom Tisha B'av lishol bo achar shomer. Listen to what Rabbi Yonasan Eibish says. He says, do you want to know why greeting someone is asur on Tisha B'av? Sheila shalom, which you can about. You hear the shaila. If today is all about sinas chinam, baseless hatred, so dafka I should go out of my way to greet every person. Listen to what he writes. He says, Ki HaKadosh Baruch Hu yira lelevav, sheyesh rabim hamazbirim pamim el re'eim aval ra'a bilevavam. Rabbi Yonasan Eibish says, because you know what the problem with people is? Sometimes we're so fake. Sometimes we're so disingenuous that I give a smile to someone, I give a greeting to someone, but inside I hate them. Inside I despise them. As soon as they turn around, I'm going to speak negatively about them. So says Rabbi Yonasan Eibish, Chazal say, today, keep your smiles. Today, keep your greetings. Today is the day for you to retreat inside of yourself and ask yourself, how do you treat other people? Stop hiding behind the fake smiles and the fake salutations. Stop hiding behind the nice greeting visage, but yet deep down harbor such animosity and negativity towards the other. So you know what? Don't say anything to anyone on this day. Don't greet anyone. Retreat inwards and ask yourself what your relationships are really like. And why is there an Isser in Talmud Torah? Listen to what Rabbi Yonasan Eibish says. He says sometimes because we think that as long as we're learning, and we think as long as I'm living according to the letter of the law, and you can't show that my behavior is averadik, then by definition it's okay. And it's not true, says Rabbi Yonasan Eibish. You can live within the letter of the law, but still be a very morally bankrupt and spiritually bankrupt person. So today we don't want you learning Torah, says Rabbi Yonasan Eibish. What do we want you to do? We want you to look inwards, and we want you to go ahead and examine, how do I live? How do I treat people? How do I relate to other people? So I will say, if you bring this together, Tisha B'av is this incredible progression. Again, we have the tears of Reb Tzadok of the Sfas Emes. I have the need to think from the Piazetzna. And now, the Yavitz teaches me, Rabbi Yonasan Eibish, what do I think about? Well, the first step is the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed because of sinas chinam. It was destroyed because of baseless hatred. You know, I think many of us are so tired of hearing about sinas chinam. Right? I got it. We all have to get along, right? If I hear another speech about Jewish unity, another video about Jewish unity, another vart, I don't know what I'm going to do. But it's the MS. It's the MS. The Beis HaMikdash was destroyed because of sinas chinam. And the Beis HaMikdash will be rebuilt because of avas chinam. So today is the day we have to ask ourselves, what kind of people are we? You know, we live in an age where it is so in vogue, it is so in fashion to malign people, to deconstruct people, to hurt people, to attack people. And everyone does it. And you know, it used to be that you would look to leadership, maybe to model the right kind of behavior. Certainly in the realm of political leadership, we have no role models. No role models, unfortunately, on either side of the aisle. No one to emulate. No one to look to. No one to be a beacon of, oh, that's what a human being looks like. And sometimes, in other areas of leadership, whether it be religious or sometimes it's also hard for us to find people who truly embody love, of every individual. Very often, we love certain people. I love people like me. I love people of my sect. I love people of my group. I love people who look like me, believe like me, practice like me. By this goes both ways. But to love all Jews, it's a very lofty aspiration. So we'll say, so what do you do when you can't necessarily find someone who models this behavior for you? Says the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos. The Mishnah says, Asei lecha rav. So we're familiar with that Mishnah. Make for yourself a rabbi. Here, Shmuel Uzida, the Medrash Shmuel, has a dramatically different reading in it. He says, Asei lecha rav. Sometimes you have to become your rabbi. Sometimes you have to become your rav. Sometimes if you can't find someone to model the right kind of behavior for you, model it yourself. We lost the Beis HaMikdash because of sinas china. And we don't greet each other today because all too often our exchanges are fake. Our exchanges are not genuine. We don't really love each other. Maybe klape chutz, we put on a good show. Externally, but inside, there's still a torrent of animosity that plagues our people. So today, don't greet each other. Don't learn Torah. Because so often, whether we're honest or not, we hide behind Torah. As long as I'm learning, as long as I'm steiging, as long as I'm living within the realm of the law, I'm good. But sometimes you're not. Sometimes a person could be learning and living within the confines of halacha, but still not be doing what it is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants of me. Like the apprentice. You can make a good legal argument that the apprentice might not be a great guy. You would not want him as a shidduch for your daughter. But is he a rasha? I don't know. Did he violate an avera? Not sure, but yet, the Gemara says, it's that kind of behavior that sealed the fate of Klal, sealed the fate of the Beis HaMikdash. So the Piazetzna is whispering in our ear today, what are you going to do? What are you going to do to rebuild your Mikdash? What are you going to do to rebuild yourself? Step number one is sinas china. We have to address it. So I'm not going to greet you and you're not going to greet me because I have to ask myself, do I genuinely love you? You're going to ask yourself, do you genuinely love me? Do I genuinely love Jews? Even the ones I disagree with. Even the ones I don't like so much, do I love them? So I'm not going to greet anyone today. I'm not going to learn today because I have to ask myself, even though I learn a lot of Torah and I live a lot of Torah, am I living my life in conformance with the Ratzon HaBorei? Because sometimes in life you could be in line with Shulchan Aruch, but you're not necessarily in line with the will of God. So Tisha B'Av closes off our svarim to us. Tisha B'Av closes off interpersonal contact to us. And Tisha B'Av leaves us asking two simple questions. Can I work on finding genuine love for my fellow Jew? Can I work on living my life not just within the framework of what's legal and what's illegal, but can I live my life in conformance, ultimately with what is the Ratzon Hashem? And I will say, I'll end off. We're going to sing Eli Tzion in just a moment. But I'm going to end off with one last piece. I know we've already gone a little bit past the time we said we were going to. But I'll end with the following. We hopefully accomplished a lot together this morning. We cried together. We recognize that the power of Tisha B'Av is the tragedy of Tisha B'Av, is the tragedy of lost opportunities. Lost opportunities. Ilu zachinu, like the Medrash Necha said. Ilu zachinu, had we gone ahead and merited, life would have been like this. Tisha B'Av is the tragedy of the lost birds. It's the tragedy of Ilu Yacholti, if only I had a few more moments. But yet, says the Sfas Emes, that holiness of the day is still embedded in the day. And our job is to remove the klipos, remove the shells, and see the light. So how do we remove the shells? Step one, we cried. Step two, we exercised intellect. How do we rebuild our personal mikdash? How do we rebuild the national mikdash? Step three, I'm not going to greet you because I'm going to assess what my interpersonal relationships are really like. And step four, I'm not going to learn Torah because it's not enough just to live life within a legal framework. I must ask myself, Does my life satisfy the will of God? Not just the word of God, but the will of God. But the last chelik, the last piece, to removing the klippas, to removing the shells, to reveal the light of Tisha B'Av. If you look at number 18, we see in the beautiful capital Kuf Chav Vav that we say every Shabbos in Yom Tiv, Shira Manlus B'Shuv Hashem Shiva Sion, Hayinu Kechomim. A song of ascent. When Hashem takes us back to Tzion, we will be like dreamers. And there's a lot of machlokas, a lot of dispute as to what exactly that phrase means. What does it mean we'll be like dreamers? So for example, if you look at the Radak writes, it says, Hayinu Kechomim. If you look in the last three lines of the Radak, Hayinu Kechomim, Kecholim Yof, Be'eininu Tzaras Hagalos, Be'rov Hasimcha Shetie Lanu, Bishuvenu La'artzenu. So writes the Radak something amazing. That what's going to happen when the Gula Chazon Mashiach comes, so our suffering will be like a dream. Now what does it mean the suffering will be like a dream? The simcha of Mashiach, the simcha of redemption, will be so overwhelming and so acute and so amazing that the simcha will eclipse all of the suffering. The simcha will eclipse the suffering. But then the Radak goes on, Ki perish Adoni Avizal. So the Radak says, that's my father's pshat. Hayinu Kechomim means that when Mashiach comes, the simcha will be so great that it will eclipse every last vestige of suffering. V'achacham, the Ibn Ezra writes, Ken Yomru Yisra b'shuv hakel yisparach shivusam. When HaKadosh Baruch Hu brings the Mashiach and brings Geula, Ein Adam roa be'inav kipela hazeh rak b'chalom. No. It means that when people see the great rejoicing of Mashiach, they will say, such rejoicing like this, it only occurs in dreams. They will say, do you hear the Yisodistic Machlokas? You hear the fundamental dispute that's unfolding over here? See, the father of the Radak says like this, when Mashiach comes, the simcha is going to be so acute that the suffering is going to be forgotten. But the Ibn Ezra says, no, that's wrong. That doesn't happen. Suffering is never forgotten. No matter how great the future simcha is, the suffering always remains. The scar always remains. The simcha will be great. But simcha, which takes away suffering, that doesn't happen. Rather, the simcha will be so great that people always say, we'll never imagine that such simcha could be felt in this world. We only thought that such simcha is the stuff of dreams. That's what they're going to say. Such an incredible machlokas. What's going to happen when Mashiach comes? Will the simcha of Mashiach wash away all of the pain of the past? Or no? The pain of the past always remains. You always have your scars. It's just that the simcha of Mashiach is going to be so great and so overwhelming. If you take a look at number 20, so Alina Birnbaum writes in her, towards the end of her book, Hope is the Last to Die, she writes, of our entire family, only Marek and I, that's a brother of hers, survived. I met him after the war in miraculous circumstances such as occur only in the dreams of women prisoners. On a Warsaw street, the first day of my return from the Neustadt camp in June 1945. Marek was riding a bicycle, and I was walking along in torn sandals on my way to see the Jewish committee in Praga, in the Praga district of Warsaw. Suddenly, Selina beside me cried, "Look, that man on the bicycle looks like Marek." I glanced around, not expecting anything, for Selina kept finding resemblances to relatives or friends, and I did catch sight of my brother. I did catch sight of my brother. I cried at the top of my voice, "Marek!" He looked around in surprise, immediately jumped off his bicycle and ran up to me. In the middle of the street, surrounded by a crowd of interested and touched people, we threw ourselves into one another's embrace. But after a moment, Marek moved away a little, looked at me closely, and began asking me my name, my mother's first name, and what had happened to her. He did not believe it was me. Brother and sister meet for the first time after being separated for 5 years. And the brother doesn't recognize the sister. She goes on to explain that she had aged much during the war. Clearly did not look as she did as an 11-year-old girl. at the onset of the war. And I thought that this story, this episode was so dramatic. Because this is suffering. Suffering changes you. And suffering changes you in irreversible ways. Once you suffer, you cannot go back to your state pre-suffering. It's the same with loss. Once you lose someone you love in this world, you could regain simcha, you could regain joy, you could move forward, but it's never ever the same. Once you suffer, you look different. Once you suffer, you become someone different. And that's really what the Ibn Ezra was saying. The Ibn Ezra was saying, father of the Radak, you're wrong. You think that Mashiach could come along and erase the suffering of the past? You think Hayinu Kichom means that when Mashiach comes, everything that we endured is going to be erased? Like when you wake up from a dream? Impossible. That's not the way the world works. Once you suffer, suffering changes you. Once you undergo trauma, trauma changes you. Can you heal? Can you move forward? Of course. But can you turn back the clock and make it like a dream that it never happened? Absolutely not. So what does Hayinu Kichom mean? What is it that we are pining for? Aspiring towards when Mashiach comes. Take a look at number 21. So here at the end of her book, Ms. Birnbaum details that in 1986 she went back to visit the camps. For the first time since she was liberated in 1945, she goes back with a group to go and see Auschwitz, Majdanek, Ravensbrück, or I think just Auschwitz and Majdanek. And she goes through the trip and she describes in great detail the trip. Incredible, incredible stories. So look at 21. This is the end of her book. She says, we're flying home, but in my mind and in my heart, the memories of Poland and especially Warsaw are so fresh. Every now and then I burst out in quiet weeping. I miss the streets of Warsaw and that part of myself that remained there and is not found anywhere else, even though I have a home and family. Even though they are waiting anxiously and impatiently. I'm very attached to them. I fear their questions. Well, how was it in Poland? How did it go? And I, instead of answering happily, enthusiastically, will burst out in tears because it's not possible otherwise to describe such a journey into the past. I still long for solitude and continue feeling the closeness of the places where I spent my childhood. The shadow of all my dear ones who perished there hovers over them. It's doubtful if someone will understand me and be tolerant. They will say, of course, that my nerves have been weakened from the burden of these difficult experiences, that I was warned about so much before my trip. Only now do I understand how much a person is attached to those places where there is a trace of the past, some remnant, ashes of his relatives, echoes of their footsteps, their customs, their now silent voices. I didn't recognize this enough beforehand. We will soon land. I will meet my family, and everything will continue as usual. The dream is over. So much has been left behind. It seems to me that I have shed one more of my identities, of the many I have assumed in my life. I have come full circle. I have finished another chapter, but no doubt not the last one. Perhaps I will open another one. My journey is at an end. They are waiting for me at Ben Gurion Airport to take me home. And perhaps this is the meaning of Hayinu Kechomim. When Mashiach comes, Mihira B'Yameinu, and a great tidal wave of joy sweeps over Am Yisrael, sweeps over our nation, sweeps over us as individuals, the suffering of the past will not go away. The suffering of the past will not leave us. But Hayinu Kechomim means that, sometimes when you have a very troubling dream, even if you can't forget it and it stays with you, you wake up, you get dressed, you go to work, and you continue with your life. Our suffering is overwhelming, and our suffering will never go away. And our suffering has changed us in irrevocable fashion. And our suffering very much defines who and what we are and who and what we will be. Hayinu Kechomim means that we have found the strength to move on. The dream is over. I have finished one chapter and find the courage to write another. See, my dear friends, we have done this already. The great nitzchias of Klal Yisrael is that we have not gotten lost in our tears. We have not drowned in that ocean of tears. Hayinu kichoma means we find the courage to get up. We find the courage to move forward from this dream and to move on to another dream. We find the koach to move ourselves forward. It's just that when Mashiach comes, He will give us even more strength to push forward, to grow more, and to be more. But we do not wait for Mashiach in order to do this. Each of us as individuals, and certainly as a collective, find the koach to do that right now. There is so much pain which defines our national situation and our personal situation. So many ruins lay still smoldering inside of our hearts, inside of our souls, and inside of our people. The losses we learned about today are not historical losses, but it's the losses we feel each and every day, and it's just on Tisha B'Av we allow ourselves to feel it in such a visceral, raw fashion. But Shir HaMalos B'Shuv Hashem Hashiv Sion, perhaps it's to be read as a cause and effect. The Ribbon Shalom is a song that we're going to sing when you bring Mashiach. And do you know why we could sing that song? Why we will live to see that song? Because Hayinu Kichomim. Because we've always approached every period of suffering like a dream. What happens with the dream? You wake up, you get dressed, you get to work. No matter how overwhelming the dream may be, no matter how overwhelming the circumstances may be, we always find the koach to move forward. And because we have always found the koach to move forward, we will be zochet to sing the Shir HaMalos, the Shuv Hashem Eshiva Sion. So may we be zochet Mir Hashem. And the zechus of our tears, and the zechus of connecting with the neshamas of the Kedoshim of the last 2,000 years. May you be zochem Yirtz Hashem on this day of Tisha B'Av. The day when we're not greeting each other, not learning Torah. The day when we are crying tears to remove the klippas of this holy day. May we be zochet to access the light of Tisha B'Av, to find the koach, to see the ruins of our personal Batei Mikdash, to look inward and to see what we have destroyed, what we have demolished, not any external enemy but ourselves, to find the koach to rebuild our Bilvavi Mishkan, the Mikdash that resides in the heart, and in the zechus of each and every one of us rebuilding our personal Beis HaMikdash. May this be the last Tisha B'Av of mourning, the last Tisha B'Av of Bechi, the last Tisha B'Av of sitting on the ground separate from one another. Halavai we should be zocheh, Mashiach will come. Let me tell you what I think is going to happen when Mashiach comes. All the pictures and all of the faces will come to greet us. So that young boy being tormented by the Nazi is playing with his payas. He'll come to us. He'll dry our tears. He'll say to us, it's over. Mashiach is here. It's all okay. And those beautiful little children dying of starvation, sitting on the ground of the Warsaw Ghetto, will be playing happily with their friends, carefree as children will be. And they'll run over to us and they'll embrace us. And they too will dry our tears. They will say, you see, Kadosh Baruch Hu has sent Moshiach, and everything is okay. And Mina will be reunited with her little Danny. And and that little boy will run into his mother's arms. And when she asks him, "Where have you been?" I'm sure that he will answer, "Mother, don't cry. Because when I left your arms, I went into the Ribbon Shal Olam's arms. And he was holding me tight all of these years, to this very day." And Alina Birnbaum will be zochet to run into the arms of her mother. A mother who she never got to say goodbye to. A mother who she loved so much and who loved her so much. And we're going to watch all of this, and we're going to see all of this. And so many of us will be reunited with our mishpachos, with our families. And we'll see all of this, a sea of tears. But it's not the tears that we've cried over the last 2,000 years. It's a new sea of tears. Tears of simcha. Tears of joy. Tears of reunification. Tears of love. Tears of geula. Tears of Mashiach. May we be zocha miras Hashem to cry them together. Mihira b'yameinu. Amen. A very special thank you to Maishi for really arranging all of the technical details, which, as you can see here, a lot going on over here. And Shekach to Gabi for gabbing this minyan and in general this indoor minyan. And Shekach to everyone for coming and helping to make a moving morning together. Halavai, L'shana haba b'Yerushalayim, Rabbi Mincha. Amen. Mincha